Hey there, it's your boy Foxy, back for more relationship stories. Update: house guest had a deadbolt installed after being reminded that he'll have to leave soon. Questions about the situation in general, but specifically the locksmith's liability here. Original post: a childhood friend of my wife's, let's call him Pete, moved back to the area after the death of a parent and losing his job. We offered to let him crash in our spare bedroom for a month or so while he gets things figured out. Pete moved in on March 28th, and we had him sign something that said that he'd split on June 30th, whether he had his situation sorted or not. This was partially to put a hard limit on the amount of time he'd be living with us, but primarily because my brother is going to spend about 6 weeks in town for work starting in mid-July, and will be staying with us. Pete didn't seem to be in much of a rush to find a new job, let alone find his own place, but he's in a bit of a funk due to the whole situation, so we've been giving him the benefit of the doubt. On the 1st of June, my wife reminded Pete of the fact that he had to go at the end of the month. He said not to worry, and that he'd definitely have something figured out by then. She gave him the same reminder this Wednesday, June 12th. I'll spare you the details, but this time, Pete countered by confessing that he'd always been in love with her, and that she should leave me, and I could find a new place while they stay in the apartment. Which is sort of funny, because while I consider this to be her apartment as much as mine, I purchased it before we met and her name isn't on anything. Anyway, she obviously shut this down immediately, and Pete did not respond well, at all. No violence, but a ton of shouting, insulting, and attempting to guilt trip. It was intense enough that my wife just cut out to her mother's place, where she called me to fill me in on the situation. I went home from work and told Pete that we'd stick to the agreement despite his behavior, but the sooner he was out, the better. I spoke to my wife later that evening, and we decided that till Pete leaves, she'll stay in an investment property of mine that is luckily vacant right now. But I'd start working remotely and stay at the apartment more or less 24/7. Both to make sure Pete doesn't do anything stupid, and because my presence in the living room would hopefully be more than a little awkward for him. So this morning around 6, I left to run to the office to grab some stuff I'll need while working from home. I got back to the apartment about half an hour ago, and as I stepped out of the elevator, I saw a guy with a toolbox leaving my apartment, and immediately noticed that a new deadbolt had been installed in the door. I tried to explain the situation to the locksmith, but he basically told me that the lock's already in, and he gave the only key to the guy in the apartment, so it's between the two of us now. Lovely. I asked him for a card, and he said he didn't have any, so I asked where he works. He told me that it isn't any of my business, and reiterated that this is between me and Pete. I followed him downstairs, and luckily he was in a van that had a sticker with the company's name and info on the side. I called the number, asked to speak to the boss, and told him what had happened. He more or less did his best to not answer any of my questions, saying, "I'm sorry, but I don't have to inform you of our policies." Fun. So this is where I am at now. I called the police just to get a report filed, but I am 100% sure that when the officers show up, they're going to tell me that it's a civil issue. I'm not expecting them anytime soon, as this is a pretty small potatoes deal in the city where the whole thing is taking place. I was actually all set to offer Pete a cash for keys deal if he wasn't getting his act in gear by June 23rd, but I have a feeling that I am going to have to evict now. I own a few investment properties and have gone through the eviction process before, so I know that will not be a fun process given how tenant-friendly my state is, but it is what it is. We've got that vacant rental property to stay in while everything gets sorted out, so that's covered as well. My only questions now are about who I can go after for what. On that note, here are my questions. I am going to lose money on the rental that my wife and I will be staying in while the eviction gets handled. In fact, I've already done so, as I had just started advertising it, and will now have to pull the listing on a few sites, or drop a "sorry but" on anyone who responds to print ads I placed. Is this something I can sue for? In my mind, I'd name both Pete and the locksmith company in a suit, and let the judge decide who owes me what. But since I am making the decision for us to occupy the space, do I technically have damages? When I got a deadbolt installed at my old rental, I had to show the locksmith a copy of my lease before they'd even touch the door. Was that just a company policy they were following, or is that mandated by law? If the latter, is there anything I can go after them for? I don't care if it's trying to get criminal charges pressed or just going the civil route. I am not hurting for money, so frankly if I were to sue, it would be more about taking the pound of flesh that I feel I am entitled to after they locked me out of my own home. But I'd be just as happy seeing the pound of flesh extracted in a manner that does not end with me in possession of it. Anything else that I should be thinking about in this situation? I am planning on asking the police to do a civil standby or whatever it's called, so I can get a few important things out of the apartment. I am a little flustered and angry right now to say the least, so I just want to make sure that there isn't anything I should be considering beyond that. Thanks in advance, and the cops are actually pulling up now, so I might have an update shortly. He was there more than 30 days. You are going to need to evict him if he is an ass and chooses not to leave. Him trying to lock you out was idiotic on his part. Document it and it will help you. Most states do not have laws requiring locksmiths to obtain specific proof. Most reputable companies will always ask for it, so you can take them to court. However, your tenant may have provided them some proof or residency like his driver's license or some type of bill. You can most likely only sue them for losses caused by their action, which he would have to document. If you reside there, I wouldn't leave. You have just as much right to live there. If it is your primary residence, provide proof of residence and have the police force him to let you enter and give you a key to the locks he had changed. He illegally evicted OP. Let's not forget that. He doesn't own the property, nor is he subletting to OP. He didn't and literally can't evict OP. What he did was vandalize OP's property and has illegally locked him out. If the locksmith doesn't come through for you and won't change the locks, what about forcibly entering? I'm not a lawyer, but I would imagine that there's nothing illegal about breaking into your own apartment. Of course, you'd still have to deal with evicting him, but at least you'd have access to your property. The superintendent already told me I just have to say the word, and he'll grab some gear to help me force entry, but I'm gonna hold off on that till I hear from my attorney. That's a pretty cool super. Let's just say that this guy gets a sick tip from us around Christmas. He's a great super in terms of managing the building, but he's an even better guy who happens to be freaking hysterical. Edit/updates. Just heard from the owner of the locksmith, who sounded about as angry as I am. He's sending a guy over with a new deadbolt and a few extra keys. Apparently, he's already arranged for his dude to show up with some cops, in case Pete is not a fan of the lock being changed. Bonus, in explaining that part to me, I got to hear somebody say, I know a guy who knows a guy in real life, and now I want to hang out with this dude. Mother-in-law took the wife out to get her mind off of this stuff, but she is now being returned to me, so I'm gonna stop staring at the internet. The locksmith will be here around 8 p.m., and Pete's brother is going to swing through around the same time to see if he can talk some sense into him. Thanks for all of the advice and well wishes. I'll try to update again tonight if anything interesting happens, but at this point, it will more likely be tomorrow, Sunday. Second update. So I got a call while I was getting ready to head back to the apartment to meet the locksmith. It was Pete's brother. Apologies for the lack of details here, but I don't know too much about exactly what went down. And a chunk of what I do know is sort of personal stuff that the brother, who just did me an enormous favor, probably wouldn't want me sharing. Anyway, the gist of the phone call was that he went by and performed a third-party constructive eviction with the back of his hand. So Pete's gone, as is most of his stuff. His brother is going to swing by next week to grab any odds and ends that they may have missed. I am planning on making him dinner and hitting him off with a bottle of good whiskey when he does so. As far as Pete goes, I'm thinking that I'll follow through with at least the early part of the eviction process, just in case he tries anything cute. Gonna speak to my attorney about this first, but he's still in the wind. Turns out he's staying at a cabin his girlfriend's family owns, and it's pretty much as close to being in the middle of nowhere as human-built structures get. His admin or paralegal, I don't know what she is specifically, but she said that yesterday was the one day he wasn't going into town for cell service. This gives us the opportunity to convince him that the situation is currently way worse than it ever was. And as much as I love this guy, he's really fun to mess with, so that's cool. After speaking with him, I called the owner of the locksmith to let him know that the apartment was vacant, so his guy wouldn't need to show up with police. Turns out he was planning on coming by to handle this himself anyway, so that was easy enough. I met him over there. He had a handful of deadbolts for me to choose from, and he switched out the lock in about 5 minutes. We got to talking about baseball because that's what you do in New York, and this led to him accepting my offer to buy him a beer so we could watch the White Sox smack our Yankees around. I got some backstory at the bar, and while this is secondhand information, the dude seems pretty reliable, so I've got no reason not to believe him. The guy who came over yesterday morning was indeed an employee of his, but he wasn't on the clock and actually borrowed the deadbolt without mentioning anything. Turns out he is an old friend of Pete's and had been fed a story about an insane landlord who had decided to move into the apartment Pete was renting. Brilliant. Anyway, my new locksmith buddy told me that this guy was officially unemployed as of that afternoon. I would feel bad for the dude, but I'm too busy not caring about what his motivation was due to the complete and total lack of any attempt to verify the story he'd been fed. This also explains the non-answers I got when I called the shop. The person I spoke to was a manager who had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. He was basically trying to buy some time to speak with the owner and the guy who installed the deadbolt, instead of just pulling an excuse out of his butt for me. I wish he'd told me that in the first place, but I do appreciate the fact that he didn't just try to go into cover your butt mode for the company, or his now former co-worker. All in all, I have a new preferred locksmith for when I need something done at any of my properties. So really, the only legal stuff left is the restraining order, and Pete very kindly sent my wife a few emails last night upon figuring out that she'd blocked his number. Not gonna go into details, but I'll just say that the contents should make the restraining order easy to get. So thanks for all of the help and well wishes, but it seems like this is more or less a wrap, and a pretty amusing one too. My wife's gone from upset about the whole thing to uncharacteristically indignant, which she's admitted is kind of cathartic for her, so I don't even have a reason to feel guilty about laughing about what a moron Pete is. Again, thanks all. Why am I not surprised the first locksmith was a friend of Pete? I knew he had to be, if he magically showed up the moment OP stepped out. Locksmiths generally aren't that speedy. I'm not screwing up my job for any of my friends. Locksmiths get paid well from what I know too. That guy screwed himself over. We just had to have a locksmith rekey 3 of the doors in our office because an employee who got fired refused to meet us to hand over his copy of the key. $900 for 2 hours work. Anyway, the gist of the phone call was that he went by and performed a third-party constructive eviction with the back of his hand. Pete's brother is completely done with his BS. I imagine Pete's brother is done with a lot of things. Imagine losing a parent. If Pete did, it's more than likely his brother did. And while you're dealing with that, you hear that your sibling has sexually harassed his longtime friend and locked himself in an apartment that isn't his. Anyone would be mad as hell when they got there. My brother did too much LSD once, and his friends/roommates called me because he was getting out of control. At this point, I was done with his shenanigans of the last few months prior, so I got there, smacked him. He's younger than me but taller, and at the time much heavier, but I just stood on a chair and told him he needed to stop being an idiot and stop harassing his friends. He now tells me he's glad I did that because he was in a fast downward spiral. And after that, he managed to realize he was being a huge jerk and idiot. Now for the last story. My 34 male girlfriend, 32 female, is dying and trying to set me up with her best friend 32 female. My girlfriend of 10 years has terminal cancer. She's in her final weeks of life. We have no children because her health has long been a concern. She's fought cancer several times through her life. We never got married because she is not a believer in the practice, but I would have married her in a heartbeat if she'd wanted it. I love her desperately and always will. 3 months ago, she made the decision to stop the chemo and let things happen on their own. She has been fading fast ever since. She is now bedridden on hospice and sleeps most of the time, but she is still able to communicate when she is awake. All her life, she's had the same best friend. Her best friend is a wonderful, sweet person and a single mother of 2 young boys. Their father was bad, and she lived with us for a while when she was getting back on her feet after leaving him, and during that time, her sons became very close with me. I've always been the male figure in their lives and I enjoy being around them genuinely. I also have a great deal of admiration for their mother, but my feelings toward her have never been attraction of any kind. I love her for the person she is, and because she's always been so important to the woman I'm in love with. A few weeks ago, my girlfriend spoke to me privately and told me that when she is gone, she wants me to continue to be there and take care of her friend and the boys. I told her that of course I would, and she shouldn't be worried about any of that. Then she told me that she wanted me to date her friend. You two would be good together and it just makes sense. She will take good care of you too, she said. She brings it up almost every day now. She had a similar conversation with her friend. Obviously, this isn't something I am interested in pursuing, and her friend doesn't really seem to want it either. But recently during a conversation, her friend said to me, "It's a dying wish. We can just pretend until she's gone that we're considering it and make her feel better." I don't even want to do that though. I want my girlfriend to know that without a doubt she is the love of my life, and I have no interest in pursuing anyone else. She's been the one for me. How do I express this to her without having her feel like I'm denying her any final wishes in life or disregarding her opinion about what I should do with the future? Now for the advice. It's a dying wish. We can just pretend until she's gone that we're considering it and make her feel better. Not sure about that. Sounds like a chick flick movie. You pretend until you don't. How do I express this to her without having her feel like I'm denying her any final wishes in life or disregarding her opinion about what I should do with the future? Babe, I know you want what's best for me, your friend, and her children, but right now we're still in the present. I love you and I want us to focus on our relationship, not on others. You already trying to matchmake hurts me. As a person who has an incurable cancer that has been chock full of complications, that's a lot of the answer right there. She's worried. Soothe the fears and tell her you'll move on when you're ready, but right now you want to spend this time focused on her and your relationship. Also, as someone with cancer, I agree. My view when reading this is that she wants the two most important people in her life to be okay. UOP to be there for her friend and children, who sound like they have had a terrible time in life, and for her friend to help and support UOP when she is no longer around. There has been some really good advice on this thread, and I will say if it were me in your shoes, OP, I would want to make sure the love of your life knows that you are there for her. You have no regrets in your life, you are sad the way things have worked out, but that you will be okay. You will continue to be there for her friend and children because they are your friends too, and you want to help them because they are good people. You know they will be there to help you as well. But as said, that does not need to be a relationship. But you understand why she is saying that. Also, OP, I know how hard everything has been for you all, and I know from my own experience that processing the reality that someone has cancer is literally the worst thing I have ever been through. Personally, I found telling others I have cancer was worse. I relived a wave of anxiety, fear, and anger every single time I broke the news to someone. After every doctor appointment, waking up every morning and having those first few seconds of calm, before remembering and reliving everything again. This repeated barrage resulted in me to have a massive drive to ensure everyone in my life will be set. They will be fixed. They will be fine. Even reading your thread, I want you to be okay.